Welcome back, fellow historians. This is Mr. Laubach. Today we're diving into the French and Indian War and why it was such a pivotal moment in American history. This conflict didn't just alter the map, it changed the relationship between the American colonies and the British forever. At the end of the video, I will do a quick recap of big takeaways. So let's get into it. What was the French and Indian War? It was fought between 1754 and 1763 and was part of a larger global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. But here in North America, it pitted the British colonies with some Native American allies, most notably the Iroquois Confederacy. Remember, they had a long-standing formalized treaty called the Covenant Chain with the British against the French and their Native American allies, most notably the Algonquin and the Huron. An important point, the French had most of the Native Americans on their side. The main cause of the war was land, specifically the Ohio River Valley, which you can see here on this map. So why was this war such a turning point for the colonies? Let's break it down into 5 key reasons. First off, we have the shift in colonial British relations. Before the war, the British government mostly left the colonies alone, allowing them to govern themselves with little interference. Think salutary neglect. But the war changed all of that. Britain ended up deeply in debt after the conflict, and they looked to the colonies to help foot the bill. They imposed a series of taxes, like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, to raise revenue. And here's where things started to go south. The colonies had no representation in Parliament, so these taxes felt like a violation of their rights. This set the stage for growing resentment and eventually the American Revolutionary War. Second, the war resulted in major territorial gains for Britain, but most gains came with new challenges. The Treaty of Paris, which ended the French and Indian War, in 1763, gave Britain control over vast territories, including Canada and lands east of the Mississippi River, the Ohio River Valley. While that sounds like a win, it created problems. Managing and defending these lands would be costly, and it led to conflicts with Native American tribes, who before this had pretty good relations with the French. One of these conflicts was Pontiac's rebellion. In an effort to avoid more conflict, Britain issued the Proclamation of 1763, which prohibited colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. Needless to say, this didn't go over well with the colonists eager to expand westward. It felt like Britain was limiting their opportunities for growth, and that fueled further dissatisfaction. The colonists felt, hey, we won this war, let's occupy this land. The third reason the war was such a turning point was colonial military experience and unity. This war was the first time many American colonists were exposed to military service. In fact, it's where George Washington would cut his teeth as a military leader. He led some of the early skirmishes and learned valuable lessons that would later serve him during the Revolutionary War. On top of that, the war forced the colonies to work together against a common enemy. Sure, each colony had its own militia and interest, but fighting side by side planted seeds of shared identity, an early sense of unity that would grow over the next decade. Reason number 4, economic strain. Britain's debt from the war didn't just lead to taxes. It also led to stricter enforcement of trade laws like the Sugar Act and Quartering Act. Colonists, who had grown used to a relatively hands-off approach from Britain, were now feeling the squeeze. The British government began interfering more and more in their daily lives, which felt unfair and oppressive to the colonists. The economic pressure only added to the growing tensions between the colonies and Britain. And finally, we come to the 5th reason the French and Indian War was a turning point. It marked the end of salutary neglect. Now, what's salutary neglect? That's the term historians use to describe how Britain had largely ignored strict enforcement of its trade laws and the governance in the colonies before the war. But after 1763, the end of the war, all that changed. With their new debt and expanded territories, the British tightened their grip. They enforced trade laws and imposed new rules, which felt like a sudden and unwelcome change to the colonists. They had gotten used to governing themselves. And this shift to more direct control led to a widespread belief that Britain was overstepping its authority. So why does all this matter? The French and Indian War was more than just a clash over territory. It fundamentally altered the relationship between Britain and its colonies. Britain's attempt to recover from the war's cost triggered a series of events that would eventually lead to revolution, a little more than a decade later. The colonists had fought to defend the British interest, found themselves taxed and controlled in ways they hadn't been before. Their resentment grew, and with it, the desire for independence. Now, prior to the French and Indian War, there were no large calls for independence by the colonists from Britain. Now, let's go over a couple of key takeaways from the French and Indian War. Number one, it shifted colonial British relations with new taxes and control. Number two, Britain gained new territories, but managing them created new tensions. Number three, colonists gained military experience and started to unify. Number four, economic strain from taxes and trade laws fueled resentment. Number five, the end of salutary neglect marked a significant change in British colonial policy. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you learn more about the French and Indian War and why it was so important. Also, I would encourage you to check out some of my other videos on the French and Indian War on YouTube for a little more depth. Have a great rest of the day.